Hello everyone, welcome back to Hit the Apex. I'm Charlie and today we have another video. This time we are reviewing round 15 of the 2023 F1 season where we were in Monza for the 2023 Italian Grand Prix. Before we get going, make sure to like, share and subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. Done Out There, the football channel, Hit the Apex, the F1 channel, and at MCFC Hibs on Twitter. We will start on Friday then, and in practice 1, where Max Verstappen picked up from where he left off last week in Zandvoort to set the early pace in Monza. The Red Bull driver topped the timesheets at the opening practice hour in Italy, ahead of rival Carlos Sainz and teammate Sergio Perez. The last time the drivers were out on track, they were sliding their way through the heavy rain and wet track at Zandvoort. However, as they made their way out of the pit lane at Monza, they were greeted by sunny skies and warm temperatures. There were a mix of tyres at the start as the drivers began to adapt to Pirelli's alternative tyre allocation, while the majority opted to run the hard and soft tyres. Haas and Aston Martin ran the mediums on both cars. It was Oscar Piastri on the softs who set the early pace, although there was unwelcome news for the newly painted Alfa Romeo drivers. Both Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu were unable to come out of the pit lane, complaining of anti-stall. But as the times began to tumble even further, it was Verstappen who set the pace on the hards, going around the Monza Circuit in a 1 minute 22.657 second lap. Carlos Sainz showed a good turn of pace for Ferrari, going 0.046 off the pace of the Dutch driver. About 20 minutes in the session, a few drivers such as Lando Norris, Alex Albon and Logan Sargent made their way out onto the track for the first time, showing their way of adapting to the ATA. And while Zhou and Bottas made it out of the pit lane, they both complained of various issues with the C43, forcing the team to box the pair. In a bid to save tyres for the rest of the weekend, no driver strapped on a second set of tyres in search of going quicker, instead focusing on long runs. This meant Verstappen's early time on the hards was good enough to top the times ahead of Sainz. Perez was third for Red Bull, with Charles Leclerc, who was stuck in the garage for parts of the session as a suspension setup change was made to his SF23, going fourth fastest ahead of the Mercedes of George Russell, who rounded out the top 5. Two-time winner at Monza, Fernando Alonso was sixth, having run the mediums ahead of soft tyre runner Norris. They were followed by the 5-time winner at Monza, Lewis Hamilton, who was eighth fastest, having run the hards for Mercedes. Tsunoda was an impressive 9th for AlphaTauri and at the Faenza-based team's home race, ahead of Alex Albon, who survived through the gravel on the exit of the Ascari chicane to round out the top 10 for Williams. Piastri wound up 11th for McLaren, ahead of his fellow rookies Logan Sargent at Williams and Liam Lawson, as the Kiwi continues to fill in for the injured Daniel Ricciardo at AlphaTauri. Fresh from a first podium with Alpine last weekend at Zandvoort, Pierre Gasly was 14th, ahead of Valtteri Bottas. The Finn came back out on track to say his car felt much better, but was down in 15th for Alfa Romeo, ahead of the Haas of Nico Hülkenberg. The other Alpine of Esteban Ocon was 17th, ahead of Felipe Drugovich, filling in for Lance Stroll at Aston Martin as part of the mandated rookie FP1 outings, with Kevin Magnussen in 19th for Haas and Zhou Guanyu in 20th. That's a wrap on FP1 in Monza, and the drivers will now go chewed through the data with their teams and debrief ahead of the second practice session later today at 5 p.m. local time. We will move to practice 2 then, where Carlos Sainz put Ferrari at the top of the timesheets on their home soil as he set the pace during Friday's second practice session for the Italian Grand Prix, leading the way from McLaren's Lando Norris and Red Bull's Sergio Perez, who crashed late in the session. With an alternative tyre allocation in play this weekend, it was another busy session around the temple of speed as drivers and teams gathered more valuable data on the soft, medium and hard compounds in use. Incidentally, the softest from Pirelli's range. One man who missed out on that running was Lance Stroll, who had only just taken over the cockpit from reserve driver and FP1 runner Felipe Drugovich when he came to a halt coming out of the Ascari chicane due to a fuel system issue in the opening minutes. Following that stoppage, and once all drivers had posted a time on softs, it was Sainz who held P1 with a 1 minute 21.355 second lap, putting him just 0.019 seconds ahead of former teammate Norris, while Perez set a time strong enough for third before going too wide at the Curva Alboreto, formerly the Parabolica, and slid through the gravel and clipped the wall, bringing out another red flag. However, there was also some traffic-related dramas for Perez's teammate Max Verstappen, who described the middle sector as shocking as he dodged several slower-moving cars en route to a time that would leave him just over a quarter of a second down on Sainz's benchmark. In another entertaining radio exchange, Verstappen asked the Red Bull pit wall for a second soft-shod lap to have a proper read, only for his race engineer Giampiero Lambiase to declare that it's not qualifying and insist on no changes to the run plan. Oscar Piastri made it 2 McLarens in the top 4, as he also slotted ahead of Verstappen, with the other Ferrari of Charles Leclerc taking 6th and Alex Albon's slippery Williams ending up 7th, the Grove outfit going early with their runs on softs. After Stroll's aforementioned stoppage, Fernando Alonso was the sole Aston Martin for the majority of the session en route to 8th, followed by the Mercedes of George Russell and Haas machines of Nico Hülkenberg and Kevin Magnussen. Valtteri Bottas was next up in Alfa Romeo's eye-catching Monza special Italian colour scheme, ending the session in 12th as the Alpines of Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon sandwiched AlphaTauri's Yuki Tsunoda in positions 13 to 15. Logan Sargent couldn't emulate Albon's pace in the other Williams as he wound up 16th, just in front of 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton, who experienced some setup troubles during the second hour of practice. Having reported concerns over his straight-line speed and the time he was losing to teammate Russell in the first sector, Hamilton radioed that I'd rather box and get this changed, only to be told that that would wipe out most of our programme. Liam Lawson continued his standing duties for Daniel Ricciardo at AlphaTauri as he took 18th, while the second Alfa Romeo was Zhou Guanyu and Stroll, watching on from the garage without a time to his name, brought up the rear. Next up then, we will go to practice 3, where Ferrari continued their fine form from Friday as Carlos Sainz set the pace in the final practice session at the team's home race in Monza as he narrowly led rival Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton ahead of qualifying late. After an action-packed first day in Monza, the drivers returned for another go at the Temple of Speed as they continued to adapt to the alternative tyre allocation for the weekend. Plenty of the drivers strapped on a set of used tyres with all 3 compounds on display to start the session, and after the first 20 minutes of running, it was Verstappen who was once again setting the pace. The championship leader's time of 1 minute 21.687 seconds on the softs was good enough to lead Sergio Perez by over half a second, with Hamilton just behind in third. The drivers then began to swap tyres as the track looked to be ramping up, with Alex Albon jumping up to second on a set of the medium tyres. As for Oscar Piastri, he was on a flying lap on the same compound before running through the gravel at turn 4. Plenty of drivers then bolted on a set of new softs with Sainz's time of 1 minute 20.912 seconds good enough to leapfrog Verstappen on his way to setting the fastest time, with the Dutch driver just 0.086 seconds off the pace. Hamilton, who was briefly fastest, finished third, although he was over half a second off Sainz's time. 2019 Italian Grand Prix winner Charles Leclerc was fourth, having set his time on old softs as he dipped his tyre in the gravel on his first lap. Fernando Alonso was fifth for Aston Martin ahead of George Russell, with Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hülkenberg in an impressive 7th and 8th for Haas ahead of Albon, although the Williams driver set his fastest time on the mediums. Sergio Perez could not come out for a qualifying simulation run on the softs after a leak was found on his power unit. He was 10th ahead of Lance Stroll, who recovered from his lack of running on Friday to finish 11th for Aston Martin. Liam Lawson was the lead AlphaTauri in 12th ahead of teammate Yuki Tsunoda in 13th, while Piastri was 14th for McLaren, with replays showing him appearing to be impeded by signs on a flying lap late in the session, with the two making contact. Logan Sargent was in 15th for Williams as Valtteri Bottas slotted his Alfa Romeo behind the American, with McLaren's Lando Norris down in 17th ahead of Esteban Ocon in 18th. Ocon's Alpine teammate Pierre Gasly brought up the rear of the field, with Zhou Guanyu splitting the pair. With third practice complete, the drivers will now come together with their teams to finalise their setups ahead of qualifying for the Italian Grand Prix later today at 4 p.m. local time. We will move on to qualifying then, where Carlos Sainz came out on top at the end of a thrilling qualifying hour for the Italian Grand Prix, as the Ferrari driver narrowly got the better of Red Bull's Max Verstappen and teammate Charles Leclerc to secure his first pole position of the season. Sainz led the way after the first Q3 runs, but improvements from Verstappen and Leclerc meant the Spaniard needed another gain of his own to get the job done. A 1 minute 20.294 second lap, giving him top spot by little more than 100th of a second. Verstappen and Leclerc had to settle for second and third with less than 1/10 of a second covering the top three, while Mercedes' George Russell beat the other Red Bull of Sergio Perez for the best of the rest spot. There was some concern for Ferrari earlier in the session, as both Sainz and Leclerc came under the spotlight for potentially failing to follow the race director's instructions regarding maximum lap time, but the stewards confirmed there would be no further action just as the pole shootout ended. Alex Albon produced another fine qualifying display to take 6th for Williams, while McLaren pair Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris sandwiched Lewis Hamilton in positions 7 to 9, and Aston Martin's Fernando Alonso completed the top 10. AlphaTauri came close to getting into Q3 on home soil, but ultimately had to settle for 11th with Yuki Tsunoda and 12th with Liam Lawson, the latter continuing to close on his teammate after a solid start to his F1 career in the Netherlands. Nico Hulkenberg was the fastest of the Haas drivers on his way to 13th, with Alfa Romeo's Valtteri Bottas and Williams' Logan Sargent, via a costly mistake on his final lap, the other drivers to drop out in Q2. Zhou Guanyu narrowly missed out on a Q2 spot in the other Alfa Romeo after losing a lap time for exceeding track limits, leaving him 16th, while Alpine followed up their podium finish at Zandvoort with a surprise double elimination in the opening phase. Pierre Gasly taking 17th after teammate Esteban Ocon experienced a wild moment at the Ascari chicane. The final two spots on the grid for Sunday's race go to the Haas of Kevin Magnussen and the Aston Martin of Lance Stroll, who felt the effects of missing FP1 to give reserve driver Felipe Drugovich a run in the AMR23 and then sitting out most of FP2 amid technical issues. So as it happened then, starting with Q1, Verstappen leads Albon as Alpine lose both cars. After Verstappen led the way in FP1, it was Sainz who set the pace for Ferrari in FP2 and 3, setting up an intriguing qualifying session that included the added element of Pirelli's alternative tyre allocation, enforcing hard tyres for Q1, mediums for Q2 and softs for Q3. As Q1 got underway using the hard tyres, it didn't take long for all 20 cars to hit the track and get some banker laps in, with Verstappen briefly going quickest before losing his initial time for exceeding track limits at the second Lesmo corner. With more laps filtering in, Albon and his slippery Williams moved into P1, a couple of hundredths up on Russell, as Perez, Sainz and Sargent, backing up his teammates' early pace, rounded out the top 5 for the time being. There was drama elsewhere when Norris came close to banging wheels with Ocon on the approach to the Curva Alboreto, formerly the Parabolica, the slower moving Alpine changing direction just before the braking zone and forcing the McLaren to take avoiding action. Putting his deleted lap to one side, Alonso and Stroll also falling victim to track limits. Verstappen stormed to the top of the order with his second effort, clocking a 1 minute 21.573 seconds, while Perez made it a Red Bull 1-2 ahead of the two Ferraris. Ocon's session took another turn for the worse with a high-speed snap exiting the Ascari chicane, taking him through the gravel and forcing him back to the pits for a check of the floor. The Frenchman, another to lose a lap time and sitting in the drop zone alongside teammate Gasly, Piastri, Hülkenberg and Stroll. As the final laps came in with the Red Bulls remaining in the pits but the other 18 drivers squabbling for track position, nobody could topple Verstappen's time, though Albon came close when he jumped all the way up to second from Leclerc, as similarly impressive Tsunoda and Perez. Sargent made it 2 Williams cars safely through in 6th, ahead of Sainz, Hamilton, Norris and Alonso, as rookies Piastri and Lawson, along with Russell, Bottas and Hülkenberg, secured the final spots in the second qualifying phase. Zhou just missed the cut in 16th after getting a lap deleted. Alpine endured a painful double Q1 exit. Gasly also losing a time but slotting ahead of Ocon. Magnussen wound up 19th and Stroll, having failed to complete a lap on Friday, brought up the rear. As Q1 drew to a close, news came in that the stewards would be looking into Ferrari pair Leclerc and Sainz for potentially failing to follow the race director's notes regarding maximum lap time, the latter appearing to hinder Zhou's final lap preparations. However, to the relief of the home fans, no further action was taken. So knocked out in Q1 was Zhou, Gasly, Ocon, Magnussen and Stroll. Moving on to Q2 then, Verstappen stays on top but the Ferraris loom. With the reduced field resetting for Q2, this time on mediums, Friday practice pace setter Sainz stated his intentions as he moved back into P1 on a 1 minute 20.991 second lap, ahead of Verstappen, teammate Leclerc, the ever-rapid Albon and Perez. Sitting in the drop zone after the first runs was 7-time world champion Hamilton, who reported that he got held up by Perez and also had no grip on his way to 12th, with Hülkenberg, Lawson, Sargent and Bottas joining him in the provisional drop zone. The final few minutes brought another flurry of improvements and ended with Verstappen leading the way on a 1 minute 20.937 second lap, only a few hundredths clear of Leclerc and Sainz's Ferraris, with teammate Perez 4th and Albon still featuring at the sharp end in 5th. Mercedes pair Hamilton and Russell progressed in 6th and 7th, followed closely by Piastri and Alonso, while Norris sealed the final Q3 spot at the expense of AlphaTauri drivers Tsunoda and Lawson. Hülkenberg and Haas could go no further than 13th, with Bottas and Sargent the slowest of the Q2 runners, the American rookie apologising over the radio for a mistake at the final corner that left him 7 tenths down on teammate Albon. So knocked out in Q2 was Tsunoda, Lawson, Hülkenberg, Bottas and So moving on to Q3 then, Sainz nets pole to send the Tifosi wild. Following a short break, the remaining 10 cars returned to the track for the pole position shootout, with some early drama occurring as Verstappen dipped 2 wheels into the gravel exiting the Variante della Roccia chicane, leaving him behind the Ferraris after the first runs. It was Sainz holding P1 on a 1 minute 20.532 second lap, 300ths in front of Leclerc, followed by Verstappen, Russell, Albon and Perez, as Norris, Piastri, Hamilton and Alonso rounded out the top 10, covered by just under a second. A sensational climax to Q3 saw Leclerc, Verstappen and Sainz all improve on their final laps to the checkered flag, the latter doing just enough with a 1 minute 20.294 second lap to secure his first pole since last year's United States Grand Prix. While the top 3 were covered by hundredths after the scrap for pole, there was a gap of 3 tenths back to Russell in 4th, the Mercedes man pipping Perez and Albon to a place on the second row of the grid. Piastri and Norris put their McLaren 7th and 9th respectively, surrounding the other Mercedes of Hamilton, as Alonso posted the slowest of the Q3 times in his Aston Martin, cut adrift by half a second. So after qualifying, Carlos Sainz said it's been such an intense qualifying, especially in Q3, where all three went for it. We were very, very on the limit. In that last lap, I knew I had some lap time to come in Ascari and Parabolica. I went for it and it worked well, thank God, because I really pushed hard in that lap. After he jumped out the car and took the applause from Ferrari's passionate fans, he was delighted to claim his first pole position of the season. So the 2023 Italian Grand Prix was set to begin at 3 p.m. local time on Sunday. And we will move to the race then, where Max Verstappen and Red Bull came out on top in a battle against the Ferraris to secure victory in Sunday's Italian Grand Prix and make more F1 history. The Dutchman moving ahead of Sebastian Vettel with 10 wins on the bounce, and the team stretching their winning run to 15 races. Verstappen slotted behind the pole-sitting Carlos Sainz at the start, but hounded his rival as the opening stint wore on, eventually forcing the Ferrari driver into a mistake at the first chicane on lap 15, and then sweeping past around the outside of the Curva Grande. From there, the reigning double world champion never looked back, pulling out a comfortable advantage up front for his latest F1 record as Sainz, teammate Sergio Perez and the other Ferrari of Charles Leclerc fought over the remaining podium positions. After an action-packed finale and some fierce defending from Sainz, it was Perez who emerged with the runner-up spot behind Verstappen, giving Red Bull their 6th 1-2 finish of the season as they turned the tables on Ferrari at the famous Marquis home track. Sainz and Leclerc sent heart rate racing at the Scuderia as they went wheel to wheel over third all the way to the checkered flag. A huge lock up from the Monegasque into the first chicane on the last lap, settling the scrap in his teammates' favour. Behind the drama at the front, Mercedes lodged a solid double points finish as George Russell and Lewis Hamilton came home 5th and 6th, despite both drivers being hit with 5-second penalties. Russell took his for leaving the track and gaining an advantage at the first chicane in a fight with Alpine driver Esteban Ocon, while Hamilton, who used a different tyre strategy to make up ground late on, took his for a clash with McLaren's Oscar Piastri at the second chicane. Alex Albon gave Williams some more points in 7th, defending from the other McLaren of Lando Norris in a race to the finish line, as the Aston Martin of Fernando Alonso and the Alfa Romeo of Valtteri Bottas completed the top 10. Liam Lawson finished on the brink of the points in his second appearance in place of Daniel Ricciardo at AlphaTauri, with Piastri 12th after the incident involving Hamilton and a 5-second penalty for leaving the track and gaining an advantage. Williams rookie Logan Sargent was left to rue his own coming together with Bottas, and a 5-second time penalty for causing that collision en route to 13th, followed by the other Alfa Romeo as Zhou Guanyu and Pierre Gasly's Alpine. It was a quiet afternoon for Aston Martin's Lance Stroll after his back of the grid start, the Canadian taking 16th at the checkered flag from the Haas machines of Nico Hulkenberg and Kevin Magnussen, who had another challenging race day. 2 drivers failed to make it to the finish, with Ocon retiring late on in the second of the Alpines and Yuki Tsunoda watching the action from the sidelines after a reported engine failure on the formation lap put his AlphaTauri out before the race had even started. So as it happened then, a sensational climax to Saturday's qualifying session saw Sainz emerge on top and delight the thousands of Tifosi lining the famous Monza track, edging out championship leader Verstappen and teammate Leclerc for his first pole of the season. With the home fans expecting that pole to be turned into a win, all eyes were on the front of the grid and whether the 2 Ferraris could team up to deny Verstappen's push for a record-breaking 10th successive win, while ending Red Bull's unbeaten run in the process. Shortly before lights out, it was revealed that the majority of the field would be starting on the medium compound tyres, while Hamilton, Bottas and Magnussen opted for hards. F1 supplier Pirelli forecasting a one-stop strategy as the quickest approach to the 53-lap race. Some drama on the formation lap involved Tsunoda's AlphaTauri coming to a smoking halt down the back straight after he reported an engine failure over the radio, prompting race control to delay the start and send the remaining 19 drivers around for another formation lap. However, with Tsunoda's car still parked on the grass next time around, the race start procedure was aborted and mechanics returned to the grid to prepare their respective cars for another attempt at getting the action underway, with the lap counter brought down to 50. Some 20 minutes after the planned start, the 5 red lights switched on and went out with no further issues. Pole sitter Sainz making a clean getaway to keep his lead into the first chicane as Verstappen slotted into second, and Leclerc fended off Russell to keep third. Despite the aborted start procedure, higher fuel loads and harder tyres that were yet to reach their optimal working windows. There were no incidents to report as the opening lap unfolded, with all the drivers keeping it neat and tidy and avoiding major contact. Further back, Albon tucked into the slipstream of Piastri at the start of lap 2 and made a move stick into the second chicane, putting him 6th behind Perez as Norris, Hamilton and Hülkenberg, who had jumped Alonso, rounded out the top 10. As the laps ticked by and DRS came into play, Verstappen ramped up the pace and used the overtaking aid down the straights to fill Sainz's mirrors, telling his team over the radio that the Ferrari is already sliding a bit, so it's okay. Despite Sainz's best efforts, Verstappen continued to close in, and on lap 6, the Red Bull driver made his first attempt at taking P1 around the outside of the first chicane, almost leading to contact at the apex as the race leader held firm. That was naughty, said Verstappen on the radio in response. With the lap chart approaching double figures, Verstappen prepared himself for another assault on Sainz, again using DRS to get agonisingly close through the first and second chicanes, but falling a few metres short, subsequently making a sweary comment over the radio about the Ferrari's straight line speed. Leclerc kept a watching brief in third, while Russell and Perez passed each other on several occasions in an entertaining scrap for fourth, the Mercedes man suggesting that the undercut will be very powerful given the level of tyre degradation being experienced. Albon remained 6th, with the McLarens following line Aston in 7th and 8th, with Piastri leading Norris. Hamilton running 9th and Alonso working his way back into the points thanks to a move on Hülkenberg down the start-finish straight. On lap 15, the pressure Verstappen had been applying on Sainz finally paid off, with the Ferrari man locking up heavily into turn 1 and eventually losing the lead into the second chicane after the pair ran side by side through the curb at Grande. A lap later, Albon was the first of the leading group to pit, swapping his medium tyres for hards, while Perez cleared Russell one more after an earlier failed attempt saw him take to the runoff at the first chicane and give the place back. After losing out to Verstappen and with that aforementioned lockup not helping him, Sainz began to fall into the clutches of teammate Leclerc, who swiftly radioed the Ferrari pit wall that Carlos is struggling a little bit with the rears. On lap 20, Ferrari decided that it was time to call Sainz into the pits and limit the damage of his aging mediums, while early stopper Albon, true to Russell's prediction, lit up the timing screens on his fresh hard tyres and made up plenty of ground. A lap later, Verstappen and Leclerc responded by diving into the pits, leaving Perez, the McLarens and Hamilton as the runners yet to stop, with the Red Bull driver coming back out in clean air, but the Ferrari man rejoining the track just behind teammate Sainz and piling the pressure on. Perez spent a lap at the head of the field before pitting for his set of hards, filing back in just behind the squabbling Ferraris, with the McLarens following suit over the next couple of laps. Norris pitting first and getting the jump on Piastri via some contact at the first chicane. Elsewhere, the stewards noted an incident involving Russell and Ocon, with the Briton having just pitted being handed a 5-second penalty for leaving the track and gaining an advantage as he skipped the first chicane to secure the position. With Hamilton the only front runner yet to make a stop, the 7-time world champion put up little defence as the hard-shod Verstappen approached down the start-finish straight at the start of lap 25 and used DRS to breeze past his 2021 title rival. The three-car train of Sainz, Leclerc and Perez also cleared Hamilton shortly afterwards as the Mercedes driver pitted for mediums on lap 28 and rejoined at the tail end of the points, telling his engineer over the radio that there's a long way to go on this damn tyre. While Verstappen pulled several seconds clear up front, the battle between the Ferraris and Red Bulls, Perez stepped up a gear as the Mexican hounded Leclerc and dramatically dipped 2 wheels onto the grass at the second chicane. "You're faster, you're going to get him," was the message from the Red Bull pit wall to Perez, who tucked into Leclerc's slipstream next time around and completed the move into the first chicane, with his attention turning to Sainz ahead. There were concerns in Sainz's cockpit at this point as the second place man reported that it will be tight to make it to the end on his current set of tyres, a comment highlighted on the timesheets as the fired up Perez drew even closer. Behind the top four, Russell was having a lonely race in fifth as Albon did all he could to keep Norris at bay for sixth. The Williams man's firm defensive driving on the inside of the first chicane, leaving his McLaren rival less than impressed. Just behind Albon, Norris and the other McLaren of Piastri, Hamilton doubled down on his earlier radio message by telling the Mercedes pit wall that we're screwed, as he questioned how he could be expected to reach the finish on his medium rubber. Nonetheless, Hamilton was in the mood for a fight and attempted a move on Piastri into the second chicane on lap 41, only for the pair to bang wheels and take to the runoff. He just turned across me, the Australian rookie said over the radio as he pitted for a new front wing and dropped out of the points. Hamilton, who was still running 8th, was hit with a 5-second penalty by the stewards, opening the door for 9th place Alonso, while Bottas and Sargent were now scrapping over the final point in 10th and 11th, the latter also being sanctioned for causing a collision. Back at the front, Perez was growing frustrated by Sainz's defending as he struggled to make a move stick, taking to the runoff at the first chicane on several occasions and shouting over the radio, "He's not leaving any room, man. Come on, we can't race like this." Perez finally found a way past Sainz into turn 1 on lap 46 and left the Ferraris to battle it out for the final podium place, with Leclerc briefly getting ahead of his teammate at the first chicane before dropping back behind at the second, the pair nearly making contact. Despite his medium shock concerns, Hamilton jumped both Norris and Albon in quick succession to rise to 6th, prompting a qualifying-style push to the checkered flag to build up a 5-second buffer, given his looming penalty. At the head of the pack, Verstappen had it all under control as he saw out the victory to move ahead of Vettel with 10 victories in a row, while putting further points between himself and second place teammate Perez in the driver's standings. Leclerc had one last look at Sainz on the final lap, but a huge lock-up into the first chicane gave his teammate the breathing space he needed. Ferrari still giving the home fans something to cheer about with a podium and strong points haul. Russell and Hamilton, the latter building up the cushion he needed, followed in distant P5 and P6 positions, with Albon edging out Norris at the flag to take 7th, Alonso bagging 2 points for Aston Martin in 9th, and Bottas taking the final top 10 spot. A late battle between Lawson and Piastri over 11th was settled when the latter picked up a 5-second penalty for leaving the track and gaining an advantage, while Sargent, whose wait for a maiden F1 point rumbles on, took 13th. Joe Gasly and Stroll were the final drivers to finish on the lead lap, with Hülkenberg and Magnussen among a handful of midfield runners to take on 2 new sets of tyres as Haas once again struggled to keep tyre degradation at bay. Ocon brought his Alpine into the pits late on with an apparent technical problem, and Tsunoda spent the race watching the action from the paddock following his stoppage on the original formation lap. F1 now moves into the final flyaway sequence of the season, with Verstappen heading the driver standings by 145 points and Red Bull sitting 310 clear of nearest rivals Mercedes in the constructors. Verstappen said after the race, "I never would have believed 10 wins in a row was possible, but we had to work for it today, and that was definitely a lot more fun. We had good pace, we were good on the tyres, but Ferrari had a lot of top speed. It was so hard to get close and make the move into turn 1. I had to force Sainz into a mistake, and luckily it came at some point where he locked up, and I had better traction out of turn 2, which was good, so we could do my own race." The next stop on the 2023 F1 calendar will be Marina Bay for the Singapore Grand Prix weekend, which takes place from September the 15th to the 17th. So that is it for this video then. Everybody, thank you all so much for watching. Please like, share and subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. Dugout Daily, the football channel. Hit the Apex the F1 channel and at MCFC Hibs on Twitter. Everybody, thank you all so much for watching, and we'll speak to you all soon. Take care and